Hello, bonjour, Ani. Welcome everyone to this event we've been looking forward to. We're addressing an issue tonight that affects us all, and that is plastics in our precious Great Lakes and the waters beyond where you might be. We are here tonight thanks to sources of knowledge, the Friends of the Bruce District Parks, Parks Canada, Georgian Bay Forever, and Lake Huron Coastal Centre, not leaving out you. We're here tonight together to find solutions to this problem that is presenting us today. So my name is Sean Skinkle. I am the Outdoor Education Coordinator at the Bruce Peninsula National Park and Fathom 5 National Marine Park right here in Georgian Bay. I can actually see Fathom 5 Marine Park right out my window right now. It's a gorgeous view tonight. I'd love for you to join the conversation tonight. If you could introduce yourself with your name and what body of water you're closest to. Now, this is a webinar, so you can see and hear me, but I unfortunately cannot hear your lovely voice or see you. However, this Zoom platform does have the option for you to use the chat feature. So there's a button. If you simply hover your mouse near the bottom of the screen and you click the little conversation bubble titled chat. So you can use this feature to introduce yourself, talk to each other. But to ask a question of one of our presenters tonight, we'd like you to use the Q&A button. Again, if you just hover your mouse over the bottom of the screen, you should see a Q&A button located next to the chat. So speakers will take questions at the end of the presentation using a first come, first serve basis with the Q&A questions. There is a raise your hand feature, but we are not using that tonight. So if you're that kid in class raising your hand, waving, we're not picking on you by not calling on you. We're not using that feature tonight. So there's some people maybe starting to use the chat here, but before we go any further, I'd like to do one thing that's always really important to me in the national park, and that is an acknowledgement. So I'm joining you from the shorelines of Fathom 5 National Marine Park, and we are in the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe Nation. This is the people of the three fires known as the Ojibwe, Chippewa, Ottawa, and Potawatomi nations. So we'd like to give thanks to the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation as the traditional keepers of this land here. Hopefully by now we have most of the folks that might be joining us tonight. And I would like, hopefully, Daryl, hopefully you're ready for this one, but I'd like to pass the floor over to Daryl Cowell, who is the chair of Sources of Knowledge that is hosting this event this evening. So just one moment and we'll get Daryl live here in a second.
I think I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Good to go. Okay, thanks. Thanks, Sean, very much. I appreciate that. Just a quick note. My name is Daryl Cowell, as you can see on the slide. I'm the chair of the Sources of Knowledge board. Of course, you all know Sources of Knowledge. We host an annual forum. We're about to have our 12th annual forum this past late April, but you know what happened to that. So we're still hoping to get it in this year. We'll be making a decision the end of July. And if we can't get it in this year, then it will become our 2021 forum. It's a good one. It was full. We had a full subscribership. It's about climate change and it involves youth. And we're looking forward to that, and as were a lot of people. So watch our sourcesofknowledge.ca webpage. We'll be keeping people informed on our decisions. So I want to welcome you on behalf of Sources of Knowledge, SOC. They say we've almost had 12 fora. We will soon. We've had, this will be our 6th SOC talk, and we've done it with different collaborations. This year, of course, with Parks Canada. We've also collaborated with BPEG. For this year, we've got fascinating, very timely topics with regard to plastics in the Great Lakes. And I want to thank, on behalf of Parks Canada, Carolyn Holmes, and of course, Sean Skinkle, for their massive work and efforts in pulling this together and making it work on a Friday at 7 o'clock. I did used to have a geology lab at Friday on 7 o'clock, so I kind of know what's going on here. And I also want to thank Lindsay Griffith and Adam Robbins on behalf of the Sources of Knowledge side that contributed. And of course, in between both of those is Brian McCaddy, who's the Parks liaison to Sources of Knowledge, and he was also, of course, his instrumental in putting this together. I'll just quickly point out, being topical, in the past week, I've picked up I think it was on CP24, there was a news article about plastics, picking up high concentrations of microplastics in the Eastern Arctic. And then in the last Quirks and Quarks was a feature about microfibers, plastic and even cotton, found digested in inside phytoplankton off Kenya. So this is worldwide, and it's a massive, massive issue. So as you know, we've got Hannah Can from the Lake Huron Coastal Conference, Conservation, and we've got Brooke Harrison from Georgian Bay Forever to talk about plastics in the Great Lake. So with that, Sean, I'll put it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daryl. Yeah, I'd like to get right over to those two speakers, our special guests tonight, who have volunteered their time to teach us about this issue. And so we do have Brooke Harrison, Georgian Bay Forever, and Hannah Can from the Lake Huron Coastal Centre for Conservation. Each of the speakers' presentation tonight raises attention to the issue of plastics in the Great Lakes, but also offering some solutions for us, some hope for us to address the problem. To give you an idea of the roadmap for tonight, the presentations are about 40 minutes each, followed by a Q&A period each time. But in the middle there, we're going to have a short bio break. So that gives you a chance to refill your drink, grab a snack, use the washroom, stretch your legs, whatever you need to do. But without further ado, let's dive right in. So our first speaker is Brooke Harrison. Brooke started with Georgian Bay Forever in 2019 as the project coordinator for the Phragmites eradication program, and also the Divert and Capture, the fight to keep microplastics out of our water. So shortly after graduating from Trent University, Brooke moved to Tobermory, and she gets to enjoy everything here that Georgian Bay has to offer, and works hard to protect and enhance the aquatic ecosystems here. So thank you so much, and welcome, Brooke.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for having me. I'm just going to figure out how to share my screen quickly. Okay. Okay, well, thank you guys so much for the introduction. Thank you, Parks Canada and Sources of Knowledge and Lake Huron Coastal Centre of Conservation. We're excited to be here tonight and kind of just help educate and talk about plastics in the Great Lakes and Georgian Bay. And as mentioned, there will be a question period at the end. So if you guys do have any questions, just put them in the chat box. So to start, I'm just going to quickly talk about what Georgian Bay Forever is. So we are a charity dedicated to scientific research and public education on Georgian Bay's aquatic ecosystem. Our mission is to protect, enhance, and restore the aquatic ecosystem of Georgian Bay by funding accredited research on water levels, water quality, and ecosystems. Typically, we focus mostly on the eastern shorelines of Georgian Bay. We have done some work on this side and kind of towards Collingwood area, but typically we are mostly on the eastern shorelines of Georgian Bay. So this is just kind of a brief highlight of what I will be going over this evening. So we'll go through this presentation. I hope you learn about plastics, microplastics, and specifically microfibers. You'll learn about a pilot project happening right here in Ontario. And most importantly, I hope you challenge yourself on how you can reduce the amount of single-use items that you use and how to kind of become an aware consumer. So I want you to look around the room. I'm sure you see a lot of items, single-use plastic items that are destined for the landfill. Did you know that almost every piece of plastic manufactured since the 50s is still in our environment today? And typically only 10% of plastics are properly recycled, depending on what municipality you are in. Every year, Canadians throw away 3 million tons of plastic waste, and many of these items are just used to make our lives filled with convenience and ease. But there are sustainable options and alternatives, and that's what we're going to kind of highlight today. So what you may not be aware of are microfibers. So we know what plastics are, we know what these microplastics are, but I will specifically be focusing on what microfibers are. So these are some of the smallest of the microplastics, and they come from the clothing we're wearing. So the clothes are made from a variety of different materials, many of which are plastic polymers, such as polyester, spandex, and nylon. Every single time we put our clothes in the washing machine, thousands of tiny plastic pieces wash away in the form of these small fibers. And this is what we call microfibers. So before I really dive in, I just want to highlight this. Usually I do this presentation with our partners at the University of Toronto in the Rockman Lab. So Lisa Ertl and Sam Athey are the two PhD candidates that we work very closely, and as well Dorsa, who's an undergrad student at the Rockman Lab. Usually I do this with them. Tonight it will just be myself, but I just want to acknowledge that many of these slides that I'm going to be highlighting and the research is in partnership with the Rockman Lab. So here's a beautiful picture of Georgian Bay that we all know and love. It provides us with recreational waters, it provides us with commercial opportunities, drinking water, and so much more. As the temperature gets a bit warmer, I'm sure we're all so excited for that first swim. As we enjoy the beauty of the bay, I'm sure you don't think about the thousands and thousands of microplastics that you're swimming beside. When we think about Georgian Bay, we think about the crystal clear, beautiful waters, but what we do know now is that it's polluted with plastics. Many of them we can't see with the naked eye, but these are microplastics and microfibers. Microfibers are the most common type in the Great Lakes and can be some of the most harmful to the ecosystem as it gets easily into the food chain and transfers through the trophic systems. So microplastics are found all over the world and commonly found in these ocean gyres due to ocean currents and wind. You may know the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, some of these other floating islands of trash, but what might surprise you is that we are seeing concentrations higher in the Great Lakes than we are seeing in the oceans. This may be surprising because we aren't able to walk on these massive piles of garbage, and we maybe can't see them, but because we are so close to the human sources, these microplastics are sometimes larger magnitude than those dispersed in the oceans. This is also the case for Great Lakes fish, which I'll talk about. We are seeing a higher concentration of microfibers in the fish in the Great Lakes than we are seeing in the oceans. So how did this all begin? Why did this happen? The rise of plastics really began in the 1950s due to convenience, availability, low cost, and durability, which has made this a very popular material. This picture from Life magazine was captioned, "The objects flying around through this air in this picture would take 40 hours to clean and except no household wife need to bother." So we're hoping that the damage that we've done since the 1950s and with the production of plastics, we're hoping that we are starting to steer away from more of a sustainable option, sustainable alternatives, but we do know we still have a very long way to go. This is also a period where polyester and nylon rose in popularity. Also the time of the electric dryer. So we're seeing more and more of these materials be developed. And we know that almost all of these materials are still on this earth today. And these are materials that were made 50, 60 years ago, and they are still very much on this planet. So this graph here, this image, it shows over 8,000 million tons of plastic has been produced. Most of that has been disposed of. This graph shows that currently 2,500 million tons are in use, but over half have been just discarded to the landfill. Some have been incinerated and some have been recycled and put back into the system, but majority of plastic since the 1950s has just gone thrown out and filling up our landfills. It's also important to note that the #1 most common plastic single-use item that is disposed of is the single-use food container. So when we go out to restaurants, packaging at the grocery store, unfortunately we're seeing an increase in this during these times, but that is the most common single-use item. But second behind that is textile. So that is where these microfibers are coming, which is what we'll focus on. So for plastic pollution, Over 800 species have been proven, both big and small animals have been proven to interact with plastics through different means, such as ingestment, tanglement, through net use. They find something and use it in their nest, or they find something and feed their young with it. We are seeing microplastics in our Great Lake fish, and there's so many animals being added to this list. In the Rockman lab, which I'll highlight in the next slide, we are finding microplastics in over every species that we are sampling, which is in the Arctic, Atlantic, Pacific, and the Great Lake Oceans. So we are continuing to add to this over 800 species. And I think it would be every species, unfortunately, interacted. It's just these are the ones that specifically have been researched to try to identify plastic within them. So this is one of our partners, Sam Athey, who we work closely with. She traveled to Northern Canada in summer 2019 to sample surface water off the Coast Guard research vessel. So these are the surface waters the points that she checked. So all she did is she dropped a bucket overboard, pulled it up, and then sampled the water contents within that, looking for the plastic. So she found that in every single sample that she had, it had less than 1 microfiber per liter of water, which is good. It's less than the drinking water average, but the fact is it's still there. So if we look at that map, those are very remote locations. They are not close to where humans live, where we are polluting the waters. So we are seeing that these ocean currents and air winds, they are definitely bringing our waste into all of these different locations. So we are seeing it in ice core samples, water samples. We are being able to identify that there are fibers in all of these samples. So as technology increases, we are able to see smaller and smaller microfiber pieces, as we are able to identify that these microfibers are becoming the most common type of microplastics, just as our problem, and it is definitely the most common microplastic that we are seeing. As I mentioned, we are seeing them in ice cores. We're seeing them in water samples, mountaintops, agriculture soils. Pretty well anywhere we look, we are able to identify microfiber pollution. So as you sit in your room, or maybe in the next time you're in a sunny room and the light is shining in, I'm sure you have also seen these microfibers when we're sitting in the sun, and you can kind of see dust that has color to it. That is indeed microfibers. So often colorful dust, that is air pollution that we are seeing in our homes and that we are breathing as well. So it isn't just in the environment and ecosystem, it is in our homes that we are seeing these microfibers as well. So additionally, as part of the research, what we have started doing some wildlife research to see who and what is contaminated with these microfibers. So we are able to identify that microfibers are ingested by wildlife in places as remote as the deep sea. So they have been found in the Marianas Trench, which is the deepest part. In seafood, microfibers have been found as the dominant particle type, and also microfibers can transfer between trophic levels in the food web. So when the predator, so transferred from the predator to the prey. So we are seeing them, they're easy to transfer kind of within the food chain and the ecosystem. So as part of our research, so Lisa has been working in the Great Lakes specifically. In the Great Lakes, Lisa has found a mean of about 25 microfibers per fish. So these are found in the gut of the fish. Some of the fish that she has sampled are all offshore, but rainbow snout, lake trout, these are offshore fish, and she is finding about 25 microfibers per fish. This research is in progress, and it is continuing to grow, but it's just showing that yes, indeed, they are in the fish in the Great Lakes. Another partner in the lab is Keenan Monroe. She is in the Rockman lab, and she is working on near shore fish and also bottom feeding, and she has found up to average about 200 microfibers per fish in the bottom feeding and the near shore. So what that is showing, it does depend on where these fish are, but it is it is proving that there are microfibers in all of these fish. So the habitat does make a difference, and we are definitely seeing them in the fish. So what does this mean? What are the effects? This is the question that we all want to know. This is the question that we are quickly trying to research and quickly trying to identify. We don't quite know yet. We have been able to see variety of different impacts, but the research is very ongoing. But we are seeing cases of species eating this plastic instead of food. So what that does is it doesn't give them the proper nutrients. It makes them think they're full, but that these animals are full, but they are not full. And that means they're not getting the nutrients, and then often they're starving to death because they're consuming these plastics and then have nothing to actually continue on. It can also be a chemical stressor. A lot of plastics have different properties that make them flame resistant or more durable, and those chemicals are consumed. And again, this research is ongoing, but we are aware that these are on plastics, and we know that these are not good for the species. And then, not to alarm everyone, but they are also in us. It's not just fish that we are seeing it in. We know it is in our drinking water. We know it's in our fish. We know it's in our beer, our salt, the air we breathe. We know we are consuming microfibers. It is estimated that humans consume about the size of a credit card of plastic every single week. And if you drink from a plastic water bottle, it is far higher compared to just drinking your municipal or well water. So it is alarming. We don't know what the impacts are to humans, but what it means is that our mismanagement of our waste, it's getting back to us, and we are consuming them. So we need better strategies to deal with this waste and kind of how to deal with this waste, because I don't like the idea of that I'm consuming a credit card size of plastic every single week, and I can't imagine you guys are that thrilled about that either. So we do know we need to find a solution as to why this is happening and how to control it. So connecting the microfibers to the source. So this is all a relatively new field. The first study to report this was by Mark Brown in 2011. He linked the microfibers to a source. So what he was able to do is he was able to identify that what was showing up in these marine environments are very similar to the synthetic materials that we have in our clothing. So he was able to link that laundering our clothing that comes out of the wastewater facility plant is directly going into the aquatic system and impacting the ecosystem. So there is some more recent studies. As I said, it is a really developing field. Our technology is getting stronger, and we're able to identify these microfibers more and more. And more recent studies show that hundreds and thousands of microfibers can be released from a single load of laundry effluent. Other sources like cigarette butts, dryers, carpets, fishing nets, we know these are microfiber sources as well, but the main one really is from our laundering of our clothes. Wastewater treatment plants on the Great Lakes has shown to release over 4 million microplastics in a single day, and most of these are microfibers. So if you are on a wastewater treatment plant, if you are on municipal water, your water does go through the wastewater treatment plant, and often it is caught, but there is always still some, up to 90% of it can be caught, but there is always some that still gets into the water. So now that we know what microfibers are and the impacts of them, what can we do? So this was a question that was asked. As a pilot project, we investigated the effectiveness of 2 technologies marketed to reduce microfiber emissions. So the work was conducted by 2 undergrads, Haley and Jack, who did loads of laundry with and without these devices. So one that goes directly into the wash, which is this Cora ball, and the other is an external one, which looks at the effluent coming out of the washing machine. And and so we were testing these 2 different sources with these red blankets that you see around them. That was what we were washing in the laundry. So how effective can these fibers be mitigated by the wash? The study was published just last year, and here are the results. The mean number of fibers per liter of washing machine effluent. So without either device, we found an average of 5,000 microfibers per liter. With both devices did decrease the amount of microfibers being released. The coral ball found to be a reduction of about 26%, that was the in-wash filter, and then the effluent filter, so the external filter, had about 87% reduction. So this shows that the filters, when added, the filters, when added to the machines, they do decrease the microfibers, and they do decrease them before they go to the wastewater treatment plants. So additionally then, after this, we tested the Filtrol, which is another filter, and that actually reduced microfibers by about 89%. So with all of this, we started to look at the alternatives. There we go. So from this research, we identified that yes, indeed, microfibers are coming from the laundry machines. So we did some backwards calculation using the city of Toronto. So on average, the results show that between 90,000 to 138,000 microfibers per wash loads are released. So the average household does about 219 washes per year. In Toronto, there's about 1,179,057 households. So what that results in is about 23 to 36 trillion microfibers being released per year in Lake Ontario. So when we start to look at the alternatives and the coral ball and these external filters and kind of what we can see, we knew that so the coral ball would reduce about 6 to 9 trillion microfibers, and these external filters on your effluent, they can reduce 20 to 31 trillion microfibers per year. So that is per household. So once this was all established, we realized that yes, indeed, in the lab that these filters do work. This is when we wanted to test it in a residential setting. So does it work on a residential scale? How large can we get this? So this is when Georgian Bay Forever got involved. We both were interested in microfibers. We knew that microfibers were in the water based off these fish studies and water studies. So our partnership started in 2018, and this is where the project Divert and Capture came from. So now that we know kind of what microfibers are, how they impact us, now we will look at the solution. So this is where Divert and Capture came in. So there's 3 main goals of Divert and Capture. The first is to physically divert microplastics from entering our water at the source. This is the Perry Sound pilot project. The second is to engage the community with hands-on shoreline cleanups. And then third is to provide the public with information on microplastics and practical tips to reduce plastic use. So before I kind of dive into the microfibers part of it, I just want to quickly touch on the second and third part of it. So in 2019, we had 13 shoreline cleanups. We had 71 volunteers volunteer over 140 hours. We cleaned up nearly 5,000 meters of shoreline, and we cleaned up 462 pounds. So thank you to everyone involved in these shoreline cleanups. They are really, it's a way to actually get yourself on the ground. And here are some of our results. So in every shoreline cleanup that we did, we tracked what we were collecting. So everyone had these tally sheets, and we were seeing what we were actually picking up. So we saw a lot of cigarette butts, food wrappers, paper, bottle caps, kind of the things you'd expect. But by a landslide, the majority of things that we were collecting was polyester, which is the foam pieces, which is foam from most likely docks. So this was very alarming. These are some of the photos that we had from these shoreline cleanups. So some of them are these macro large pieces of dock foam, but some of these are so small and they are really challenging to pick up. So what this did is it raised awareness that there's definitely an issue with dock foam, not just on Georgian Bay, I'm sure, but that is where our study is. So what we are doing, we are in the process of conducting research on the impacts of dock foam and in Georgian Bay and on the aquatic ecosystem. This information has just recently been published on our website. So if anyone is interested in learning more about the impacts of dock foam, I'll direct you there. And then the other part of divert and capture is workshops. So that's very similar to what we're doing tonight. It's probably one of my favorite things about divert and capture. I love we go to farmers markets, workshops, these webinars. It's really fun to just kind of interact with you guys and see what your solutions are and how to brainstorm kind of how we can have a more sustainable future and be better stewards of this earth. But back to divert and capture. So as we previously went over, we know that microfibers are in our water. We know that they are very abundant in the environment, in Georgian Bay, in the ecosystem. So what can we do? How can we find this solution? So we wanted to bring these filters to a residential scale in Parry Sound. So Parry Sound is about 4 hours north of Toronto. It's pretty much directly across from Tobermory, where I think quite a few of us are tonight. It is 4 hours north of Toronto. It's on the shorelines of Georgian Bay. The community is home to over 6,000 year-round residents connected to town water. We designed and started running this study with 100 filters in people's home. Since we know that these filters are effective in the lab, we're really excited to test these out in the community. So the only 3 things that you had to do to be part of this study is you had to be connected to town water. You had to have the space to actually install the filter, and you had to agree to keep the filter running for 2 years for the duration of the study and save your captured laundry lint to give us so that we can research it. So the image on your left is what these filters actually look like. So it is connected to your washing machine, and a fine mesh bag goes inside the filter to collect the microfibers. Depending on how many people are in your household, and how often you do laundry, it is expected that you'll have to clean these filters about every 2 to 4 weeks. It looks kind of similar to what you would see in your dryer lint. It's similar to that. So the image on your right then is the Parry Sound wastewater treatment plant. So if you are connected to city water, meaning that you're not on a septic, the water from your washing machine, your shower, your dishwasher, everything goes through the wastewater treatment plant. So after the full treatment, it often goes back into the water. So for Parry Sound, this is Georgian Bay. So this is where we're testing the microfibers as well. We installed 100 filters in people's homes in a community with just over 1,000 homes connected to the municipal wastewater treatment plant. So we expected to see about a 10% decrease in microfibers at the wastewater treatment plant throughout this study. So this is the timeline of the study. In fall 2018 is when it kind of got started. January till July is when we started recruiting 100 households to be part of this study, and we also installed 100 filters in homes. August 1st is when they all kind of turned on. So we did a sample at the wastewater treatment plant before this, which I'll talk about in a bit. But then we did the first round of collection in October, and we did the first round of second round in February. And this summer we're hoping to do the third round of collection and then continue with the shoreline cleanups, workshops, and webinars if able. So I just want to say a huge thank you to the households that are participating. We have some really amazing volunteers who are dedicated and enthusiastic to kind of take on this journey and help us find a solution. It's really, really awesome that we were able to sign up 100 people. It's a study that's never been done anywhere in the world. So it's really great that they were willing and able to kind of help us with this. So on the right, you have a volunteer emptying out her mesh bag and putting it into a container. We ask that all the volunteers empty it and put it into the freezer. And when we collect every 4 months is when we pick it up. But we like to have the frozen sample. And then on the left is on the right is a volunteer standing in front of his filter. So collection in Parry Sound, this is always a really fun day. We've done 2 rounds of collection so far. In the morning, we ask that everyone puts their sample into their mailbox, and we go around in one day and collect all 100 samples. On the right is Aaron from RBC holding up 2 of the bags. So this is kind of what it looks like. On the right is myself collecting one of the samples from one of the household's mailbox. So this day is really fun. We kind of got to interact with the volunteers, kind of make sure everything's going okay, seeing what they found, seeing what's interesting to them. The first round of collection was just a few days after Halloween. So you could definitely tell kind of who wore a sequency or glittery costume a few days before, which was interesting and concerning that many sequences fall off. Okay, so that is kind of a highlight of what divert and capture is, what it looks like. Now I'm going to share some preliminary results with you. So this project is happening for about another year, so it is still ongoing, but these are some of our preliminary results that we are super excited to share with you tonight. The picture on your left is what the fibers look like underneath the microscope. So you can see all kinds of colors, the blue, the reds, the orange. And on the right here is DORSA sampling at the wastewater treatment plant. So the next step after installing the filters to see if they worked in the community setting. So we had 2 questions to ask. We measured the wastewater treatment plant. So we did this before all the filters were installed to get the base, and then we are measuring it continuing after. And then it also is by counting the fibers in the filters. So they usually come in bundles, but under the microscope, we can separate them using tweezers, and we have to count them, and you can see kind of some of the fibers there. So the blue fibers, so that is common just from jean wearing. But then blue and white and black are kind of the most common colors that we have seen. But yeah, so that's kind of them separated underneath the microscope. So we went to the Perry Sound wastewater treatment plant before the filters were installed and multiple times since. We sampled the final effluent. So after it's gone through all the steps and it's released back into the bay, we use pumps to minimize contamination from the samples, and then we gather a liter of the water. So I will also just highlight too, so with the final effluent, this is the final stage of the wastewater treatment plant. So it's clean water going back into the bay. Up to 90% of these microfibers are captured in the wastewater treatment plant system. That is often used as fertilizer on agriculture fields. So it is still continuing to be in our environment, but 90% of it is captured usually at these wastewater treatment plants, but there is still 10%, which, as we know, is still millions and trillions microfibers being released into the bay after this final effluent. And if not, it's going on to the agriculture fields with runoff and consumption from the cattle or whatever might be on the field. We are still seeing this microfiber in the environment. So in the lab, we use different filter sizes to catch the microfibers and count the number of microfibers under the microscope. So you can kind of see what this process looks like. We measure about a liter at a time, and then we're just seeing if and how many microfibers that we are able to identify. So this is just another kind of fun picture. We do separate all the fibers and identify them. As you can imagine, this does take a lot of time. That blue fiber there is much smaller than even 0.5 millimeters in length. But yeah, you can see them colored and kind of identified there. So this is the exciting part. So these are the preliminary results. This is what we were so excited for, and luckily we are so happy to see that these results is what we are predicting. So this shows the number of fibers per liter of water. On the left is after all the filters were installed last August. So this is when all 100 filters have been activated in the community. This is what we are seeing. On the right is before the filters were installed. So they were measured in March and July. And as you can see, there is a decrease in microfibers, which is so exciting and exactly what we're hoping to see. We do need more data points, and we are, as I said, this is all preliminary. We are continuing this research, but the trend does appear to be on the right direction. So just to kind of put this into perspective for you guys, Perry Sound wastewater treatment plant processes 3 million liters per day, which means even if we were to reduce the microfibers by 1 microfiber per liter, we would stop 3 million fibers from entering Georgian Bay. So these are big numbers that we are working with, and even just reducing it by 1 microfiber is really, really encouraging. So this is what the lint looks like when we collect it from the households. We collect every 3 to 4 months, and as I said, it really varies depending on how many people are in the household, how often you do laundry, kind of what clothing you're wearing. You can also kind of see like if someone is in like construction, or if they're wearing a lot of glitter on their clothes, you can really identify what kind of household it is by just looking at these samples. So yeah, we weigh every single household fibers that we come in, and then this is when we would separate and count the microfibers. So based on our estimates, there are about 45,000 fibers per gram in each bag. We estimate 1.5 to 6.2 million microfibers and microplastics were captured per one household in the first 3 months of use. So the image here is 5 milligrams of lint in about 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter. So this, what we're looking at here, is smaller than a dime in size. So you can see how dense they are, how much there are in this filter. There is probably likely about 300 microfibers that you're looking at there. And then just some fun, well, relatively fun, I guess, images that we are finding. It's not just microfibers we are seeing different types of microplastics. So glitter, we're seeing the red glitter, green glitter, pink glitter, blue fragment, white glitter. So these beads, these orange beads, we are seeing a lot of different microplastics. Majority is microfibers, but we are seeing other microplastics in these filters that we are capturing. So now to sum up and kind of what the next steps are, as I mentioned, this study is going on until March 2021. So it is about halfway through right now, but there is still a lot. These are all just preliminary results that we are sharing with you today. But what we do know is we know there is widespread microfiber contamination around the world and in the Great Lakes. But as we have mentioned, we know that these mitigation solutions are effective to reduce microfiber pollution. What we could do is we could install filters in every single home. We have 100 in Parry Sound currently. We are installing 100 more in Parry Sound, both within town, but we're also doing a few on septics to start some research of the effect of microfibers on septics. So we are doing this, but we know that isn't a practical solution. What we are not encouraging is to have filters in every home. What we know needs to happen is we need to have these filters installed in your washing machine. As similar to your dryer, we need those in your washing machine. So we do know they also work in a residential scale. Another question we have that we're curious about is, do they work in a commercial scale? So we're kind of looking at different alternatives there. We're looking at creating larger filters and installing it in, say, like a hospital or a laundromat, just commercial settings, a hotel, anything along those lines. These are all research questions that kind of are in the future that we're starting to look at. In Japan, these filters are actually already installed and directly on the laundry machine. So we are seeing countries with these legislations, and we're hoping for more. Recently, France just passed that by 2025, all new washing machines will have to have these filters installed, or not installed, as part of the machine. So we are seeing this happen. We are seeing more and more legislations and bills being passed. We're following this closely, and this study happening in Parry Sound is really being watched. We do know that there's a bill proposed right now in California and also Ontario to address the microfiber emissions, and they're looking at this study. So things are happening. What I'm telling you is not to go out and buy a filter, but there are these things to consider and just kind of be aware of, and maybe help push these bills and legislations along. We also do know that carpets, dryers, cigarette butts, these are all different forms of microfibers. But as I said, we really do know that the laundry is the main source of microfiber pollution. So this is a lot of information, and I'm aware of that. There's a lot of science thrown at you, a lot of maybe scare thrown at you, and I don't mean to scare everyone, but it is encouraging. There is lots of ways that are encouraging, like these legislations being passed, this research being passed, that we know these are effective. But what can we do today? What can we do kind of at home? How can we start? So as I said, there are lots of different filters, these corables, guppy friend bags, the lint lover, the filtrol, the one that we're using. There are lots of these different filters, but you can also reduce microfibers in other ways. So alternatives to kind of, besides the filters, are do full loads of laundry instead of half loads or smaller loads. Use reusable wool dryer balls instead of the single dryer sheets. Use natural deodorizers like baking soda. Avoid fabric softeners and detergent that contain toxic chemicals, and also using a front loader laundry machine instead of a top loader. Those are all ways that do reduce microfiber emissions as well. Other things we can do is we can avoid fast fashion. So fast fashion are items that we typically only last a few wears, a few washes. Invest in clothes that will last years. Ones that are made with proper materials, they're often a bit more money, but we know they're going to last, and they are much, much, much better than the environment than these fast fashion items. Also try to look for local sustainable items. If you can repair something, repair it over buying something new. Learn how to sew. There's lots of different ways to kind of get creative. If you have an old t-shirt, you can turn it into washcloths. Lots of different ways that we don't have to be throwing textiles into the landfill. But we can also look at natural materials like wool, cotton, or silk instead of these synthetic materials. And a huge one is just to think before you buy. You have so much power. You're controlling what is coming into your household and what you are supporting and what you are controlling. If you're unhappy about plastic consumption and plastic packaging, you can do something. I know recently I just received something that had so much unnecessary plastic, and I emailed the store. Yes, it's just one person, but you hope that it demands change, and if they get enough emails, they might look into alternative different packing solutions. So these are all different things that you can do that really, really do make a huge, huge difference. So another thing you can do, which I know we're actually able to do tomorrow, which is so exciting, but these shoreline cleanups is just picking up these macroplastics that we are seeing in the environment. As I said, that these animals are using them to create nests, they're using them they get tangled in them. Garbage doesn't belong. It needs to be properly controlled, properly managed. So do a shoreline cleanup, whether you're walking on your street or whether you're walking on your shoreline. We do have these trash tally sheets, and if anyone is interested in doing them, you can, since we're unfortunately likely not able to host these big shoreline cleanups this year, where we normally track what we are collecting. If you are interested in submitting your tally sheets, please get in touch with me. And then if you remember the slide at the start, there was so many of these single-use common plastic items in your home, and they are more than likely just going directly to the landfill. And we know there's sustainable, affordable switches, and I really encourage you to kind of explore what those might be. So what I always say is, because I know it is quite intimidating and quite a large task to do, but start with one room in your house. Maybe start with your bathroom. Identify what plastic items you're using and identify what alternatives there are. Once you kind of get into it, it's a really fun game, and just try to make your house less and less reliant on these single-use plastic items. So there's so many of these refillery stores, eco products, just less harsh chemicals, and these laundry tips that I was just giving. I really encourage you and I challenge you to think about every purchase you make. Do your research. Does a local store sell it? Is there an option to make it yourself for items out of items you already have? Can you repair that shirt instead of throwing it out? Shop at thrift stores, donate to thrift stores. Try to avoid throwing your textiles and your clothing in the waste. Lots and lots of different ways to kind of make these changes, and just challenge yourself. Start small, and it does get easier and easier and easier. But it really is the individuals who are going to make these differences. So we don't have to be perfect, but I do really challenge you to help contribute to these healthier futures that we all want and enjoy. So now I just want to end with a huge thank you to everyone who's listening. Parks Canada, Sources of Knowledge for putting this on, our many great donors and sponsors to help us create this divert and capture and have this possible. We wouldn't have been able to do it without all of you. And on that note, thank you. My email is there, and as well as our website. If you guys do have any questions, please well, we'll have a question period now, but if you do have any further questions, you can always reach out and ask. Yeah, thank you so much, everyone.
Great. That was awesome, Brooke. Thank you so much. There are a couple of questions from some of our attendees tonight that I can ask for them if you're willing and able to answer them.
Yeah, hopefully.
We have one from Daryl. Are there data regarding plastics or microfibers in groundwater?
To my knowledge, no. Well, sorry, I can't say no. I am not personally aware of it. We are, so I briefly mentioned, but we are about to install 100 more filters in Parry Sound. And with these, we are hoping to do a few of them in, with homes that are on septic beds and well water. And we are hoping to kind of start doing research of what the impacts are on these septics. And then with that comes what the groundwater impacts are. But I could say with very, very high certainty that we know it is in the groundwater. We know if it's top of a mountain that has never been touched by a human, that is from the rain flowing on it. We know it is in these groundwater because we know that from a wastewater treatment plant even, they spread these, spread this waste, or not waste, but they spread it on agriculture fields, and that often runs off into rivers and gets into the groundwater and karst system. So I personally don't have lots of research on it, but yeah.
Yeah, no, thanks, Brooke. What I was thinking, I mean, a lot of us are on septics, as you mentioned, and I can see that as being a pathway.
Mm-hmm.
We're not putting it into wastewater treatment plants directly. We're not putting it into the lake directly, but of course, septic beds have weeping tiles, sand and gravel, and of course, fine microfibers should be able to move down through that. And then depending on the nature of the subsoil and the bedrock, there is a potential path. Well, there is a pathway from all of the septic. So we're just sitting here on septic thinking, well, we're okay because we're not putting it into wastewater systems, right? But it's unlikely that, of course, sand and gravel is going to filter this stuff on a weeping tile. So it strikes me that would be, because there's a lot of septics up here and over your way. So it strikes me that that would be a strong pathway of these microfibers to move into groundwater. And from there, certainly in the case of the Bruce Peninsula, that would take it right to the lakes. So that was my thinking on that. Yeah,
I know. I don't think it is this way, and like on the peninsula, at least northern Bruce Peninsula, but often when you get a septic emptied, it does go to a wastewater treatment plant. Like that is often where they do empty your septic. I don't think that is the case in northern Bruce Peninsula, but I do know that is sometimes the case. But yeah, regardless, it is very, very likely leaching out from the septic beds, and that is kind of some of our research questions that we hope to kind of look at and look into in the coming years for sure.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's the two pathways. So we have our actual septic tanks pumped out every couple, 3 years, and that goes to the big tile beds up in this case, up by the airport. In Kilmore. So we have the municipal wastewater treatment ponds. So yes, of course, that's a pathway. And then, but surely a lot of this stuff is going past the tank and into the weeping tile. And so I suspect both are pathways.
Yeah, absolutely. It's alarming to start thinking about because it never ends.
We had another question from Tara. Do older clothes release less microfibers than newer clothes?
Yes and no. Another study that we did is we washed a lab coat 100 times and there was very little change. Definitely in the first few was the most. But it absolutely does reduce or release microfibers throughout the entire life of it, which again isn't the answer it's an alarming answer. But when we did look at this one lab coat 100 times, I actually have a jar. I should have brought it with me, but we have a jar of all the microfibers that were released in this one wash, and then 100 washes later, this exact same coat, that's the only thing in the wash. It does indeed release them, which is why we encourage like washing your clothes less. Like there's so many things, like you do not need to wash your clothes after every wear. We know that, unless you start to have an odor, you don't need to be washing your clothes after every wear.
Right. Awesome. There's another question here. Is there microfibers in reusable cloths, like to clean and shine surfaces?
Again, unfortunately, yes, especially these microfiber cloths that we are seeing that clean really nicely, and we're seeing more and more of these microfiber cloths that everyone is really enjoying, and yes, they clean things nice with Windex or whatever it might be, but we are seeing the microfiber reducing that, and that is then what we are seeing in the air when the sun is shining in, when we're cleaning these surfaces. That is the air microfiber pollution that we're seeing, and unfortunately that we are then sometimes breathing as well.
Right, it's right in the name, right? So the microfiber cloths.
Yeah.
Well, I might pass it back to Sean at this point. I think that's all the questions that we had.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Maddie. Thank you, Brooke. Brooke, the numbers, they are a bit shocking to me, a bit alarming. They are worse than I thought they were.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I am really happy to see that we have organizations right here at home that are doing groundbreaking research, and that there are other countries that have already adopted some of the solutions that you're talking about. That's inspiring.
Yes, very.
Big incentive for Canada to hop on board. It's good to know that there's some proposed legislation happening here in Ontario, and maybe we can look that up and help to be some of the people who move it forward. So thanks so much, Brooke, and also for the participants for your questions. There's some really good questions there that got me thinking. So Hannah Can is coming up next. Hannah is the Coastal Stewardship Coordinator for the Lake Huron Coastal Centre for Conservation. Hannah manages the Coast Watcher Citizen Science Program and the Coastal Conservation Youth Corps, and has written the Coastal Action Plan for southeastern shores of Lake Huron. That is a lot. You are busy, Hannah. And many other stewardship guides for the Lake Huron coastal community. So I'd like to welcome you, Hannah. Thank you so much for joining us with your expertise. And I will let you take the presentation away.
Awesome. Thank you so much to Sources of Knowledge in Parks Canada for hosting me tonight. I'm so excited to be a part of this event. And as was mentioned, plastics are such an important topic right now as we are becoming more and more aware of their impact along Great Lakes. So tonight I'm going to talk about plastic pollution in Lake Huron, from microfibers to tires. How do we sort through all of this waste? So if you've never heard of the Coastal Centre before, we were founded in 1998 with the goals of protecting and restoring Lake Huron's coastal environment and promoting a healthy coastal ecosystem. We're based out of Goderich, Ontario, and I'm coming to you from my living room just outside of Grand Bend. So like Brooke mentioned, there are different gyres in the oceans that this plastic seems to gather within. The one that's most known is that Great Pacific Garbage Patch. The North Atlantic gyre is on the other side of us in the Atlantic. But did you know that actually in our Great Lakes, Lake Superior, Huron, and Erie together contain double the number of plastics per square meter compared to that South Pacific and North Atlantic gyres? And the fun fact is that only the North Pacific gyre contains more plastic than the Great Lakes. So although they look beautiful and pristine, we're actually sitting on a bit of a cesspool of plastic pollution. So the 7 types of plastics, I'm sure if you've ever looked on the bottom of a water bottle or a yogurt tub, you see these numbers. And what do they mean? Those numbers indicate what type of plastic they are and what material that they're made of. So as we'll talk about a bit later, there's rigid plastics like a yogurt container, and then there's plastic packaging that isn't a rigid material. So this all affects their ability to be recycled. So the two types of plastic pollution that we often see in Lake Huron is pre-production plastic. This is plastic that is basically virgin plastic that gets melted down and made into other items. And then we have post-production plastic pollution. Those are items like beach toys, cutlery, takeout containers that have been broken down throughout the lake's cycles and through sunlight and made into smaller and smaller pieces. And we've actually seen in some of the science that's been published that more than 80% of the litter that's found on the shorelines of the Great Lakes is actually plastic. The other 20% could be glass, metal, or other materials. So the size of plastic pollution ranges. I know that the term microplastics has been really well documented in our recent media, but in actuality, there's a whole bunch of different size categories. So we have nanoplastics. They're the really small microscopic ones you can't see with the naked eye. They're less than 1 micron. Then the microplastics are 1 micron to 5 millimeters. So that can include microfibers, mesoplastics that are 5 millimeters to 2.5 centimeters. Those are often like water bottle lids, plastic straws, even other small little gears and stuff from children's toys. We see them all the time on the shores. Then we have macroplastics. That's a huge size range from 2.5 centimeters to 1 meter. And then megaplastics, and these are over 1 meter in size. They're tires, other large patio furniture type items that wash up on the shorelines. So I wanted to highlight some local champions on the Bruce Peninsula. These are two amazing researchers that just go to show that you don't need to have a fancy PhD or master's degree to sample for microplastics. Scott and Acadia Parent did a stand-up paddleboarding trip, basically on the southern shore of Manitoulin Island and then up along the north shore through Georgian Bay. They did 480 kilometers tandem stand-up paddleboarding. I want to mention that Acadia Parent is just graduated grade 5. So anyone can be a scientist. She's amazing, an inspiration. So they did a 31-day paddle. They took 40 surface samples for microplastics in areas that have never been even sampled before. And they also did 5 deep water samples. They came to us for help in analyzing these samples. We offered them some equipment like microscopes and filtering equipment, and they were able to process all these samples from last year when they collected them up until now. And I'm sure that they'll be wanting to publish their results soon. So stay tuned for that. If you haven't looked up Scott and Acadia's work before, I highly recommend it. So we have our own microplastics awareness program through the Coastal Centre, and this took place in 2018, I believe. We had our Coast Watcher citizen science volunteers go out into the shoreline with a Nalgene water bottle, scoop up the water, and then we brought it back and we filtered it, and we found that 9 in every 10 water samples just collected in the nearshore waters contained microfibers. Now, we didn't get into as much detail as Georgian Bay Forever did in analyzing these, but we just wanted to really see what the presence was like in that near shore. So when you think about, okay, so we know that there's plastics in our environment, so how do you clean them up? Well, it's really challenging. The smaller of an item it is, the harder it is to clean up. Nanoplastics, even the smallest water filters like the Filtrol, again, like Brooke said, 89% effective. So that's still pretty amazing for that small of a device or an item. And then as we go up, we need sifting devices and prevention. Hand picking nurdles off the shoreline is often seen at our beach cleanups. And then removal machines as we get into the bigger things like barber surf rakes, and even larger tractors have to remove some of the megaplastics. So nanoplastics is really small, less than a micron items. The problem is that they're the same size as phytoplankton. So fish will eat them, they consume them without knowledge, and then as Brooke said, the toxins bioaccumulate in their system and it ends up leading to their untimely demise. So the remedies for these are stopping the entry into the environment, reduce, reuse, recycle, and having finer filters on our effluent water outputs. And it's almost impossible to remove what exists already. And that's basically because these items are so small that if you were to filter all the water, you're going to get a lot of organic material within that as well. So it just makes it extremely challenging to target only those microplastics. Now the microplastics, they have similar problems. They're very time consuming to clean up. They're very hard to find some sources. We often hear people ask, what are the sources of nurdles, those little tiny white pellets that you see on the shoreline? They bioaccumulate in wildlife again, clogging digestive tracts, kind of acting as a hairball. And remedies that we found is encouraging biodegradable products, like we talked about in the question section after Brooke's presentation. Those microfiber cloths, yes, they might be cheaper to purchase, and they might on the surface look better for the environment because they don't require agricultural inputs, but in the long term, they're actually causing more damage to our environment than a biodegradable option like a cotton towel that could last you your whole life. So Filtrol filter units and fine sediment sifting devices are really the only remedy for this size of item. Mesoplastics, the 5 millimeter to 2.5 centimeters. They're also can be hard to clean up depending on how degraded they are via sunlight or even just how long they've been tumbling in the lake. So the huge buildup in the lake has been caused because of the presence of plastics since the 50s. So, you know, we didn't get here in a night. We're not going to improve it in a night. So it will take time to have a substantial effect on the cleanup of these items and removing them from our ecosystem. So if you think about some beach glass that washes up, I mean, some of this beach glass is almost 100 years old. That's how long it's been tumbling around in our lake before it gets into an artisan's hands. So when you think about the residence time of Lake Huron being 22 years, if you were to throw a water bottle into Lake Huron, in theory, it could tumble around in the lake for 22 or more years. So again, we can have a bioaccumulation in wildlife because they view these small items as eggs, so they would consume them thinking it was a tasty snack, and then it builds up. And remedies including societal change, so us just moving away from the use of plastics towards biodegradable options is basically the -- way we can prevent the release of these plastics. But then cleaning up out of the environments using large sifting devices. So at our beach cleanups, we will use these small kind of handheld colanders, splatter guards, like those bacon splatter guards. We see people using those, and we offer them at our cleanups. This gentleman up in the top right-hand corner, he's created this massive sifting device, which really helps expedite the process of sifting through all the sand to collect all those small mesoplastics that are in beach environments. So macroplastics are the next. They're easier to clean up because they're larger. They're 2.5 centimeters to a meter, easier to grab when you're doing your cleanups. But they often consist of fishing gear, nets, rope that's all tangled up, large kind of bleach jug style items, and plastic bags. And the problem with especially these fishing gear and nets and rope, when they get all tangled up, there could be a number of different types of material that are all tangled up in there, and you can't identify them. They don't have a label like the number on your water bottle. So they basically are just landfill. You can't recycle them. We also see waste escape, unintentional littering. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. So that's, you see a garbage can that's overflowing and the litter is flying all over the shoreline. That's kind of unintentional littering, but it happens all the time. We see it, especially on long weekends on the shoreline. So remedies for this are securing garbage containers, making sure that they're doing the best that they can at containing that litter, educating people on why they should remove wash up of material and then how to dispose of it properly, especially on private property. The majority of Lake Huron's shores is owned privately. So if we can educate people on how to do their own cleanups and be stewards of the land, then that helps us all in the long run. And then, of course, education about leave no trace and packing in and packing out. So that's people that are going to day areas and bringing a lot of single-use items with them and then leaving them on the shoreline, when we could transition to leaving no trace and making sure that any items we bring to the beach are removed. And the hashtag that I love is no maid service. Okay, so macroplastics, this item here, pulled behind the tractor, this is called a barber surf rake. And as you can see in this diagram, there's these small tines within the machine that sift through the upper layer of sand, collecting macroplastics, things that are larger than 2.5 centimeters typically. And then they get put into this reservoir, and then they can be dumped when they get off the shoreline. But we see beach groomers, as they're typically called, all over the southeastern shores. And the problem with them is that because they fluff up that top layer of sand, it actually allows that sand to become airborne, and it blows further inland as the winds come off the lake. So this image at the bottom is Grand Bend Beach, and they're in a deposition zone. That means they get a lot of fresh sand added to their beach every day, just based on the coastal processes that exist. So they can groom their beach 3 times a week, and it looks nice and clean like this, but they also have that nice, thick, fluffy layer of sand. Whereas this picture at the top here is Sauble Beach, and because they aren't in such a heavy deposition zone, they don't get as much sand building on the beach every day. If they overgroom the beach, then we get these wet patches. And that means that all that fluffy top sand has blown away, and then the coarser sand is left underneath. And the water table is actually really close to the surface on shorelines. So that water table is pushing through the sand and causing a wet beach. So it's really important, if we're talking about using a beach groomer, although they're really effective, they can also have negative consequences on beach health, and especially beach vegetation. And lastly, the megaplastics. Those are over 1 meter. And tires, there's a pedal boat down here at the bottom. So the problem with these is that they're often so large that they require heavy machinery to remove. And this is not something that a lot of landowners have. There's a lot of machinery bylaws along the shoreline where you can't actually drive machinery onto the shoreline. And then who pays for the removal of these? You know, when you take a load to the dump, you have to pay for the deposit of the material. And who's responsible for that? A lot of times, the source of these materials can't be traced to any one person or organization or area, and they entangle wildlife, and they can also gather in certain areas, like Brooke was talking about with the dock foam, and completely ruin the health and integrity of a certain coastal ecosystem. So other issues with megaplastics is that they can damage boat equipment. So if these are floating in the nearshore waters and you're driving your motorboat through and it gets caught in the propeller, it can completely blow your motor. And of course, if you're swimming along and you can't see the bottom and all of a sudden your foot gets stuck in a tire, it can be quite alarming. And of course, you know, anything that's a little less soft than a tire could cause you physical damage. So these are all the issues with megaplastics. And remedies just include reducing the ability of patio furniture or other boats from getting washed away in a storm. So setting them back from the shoreline properly, tying watercraft to docks properly. And we see a lot of times too, small watercraft like kayaks or stand-up paddleboards, they can come washing up on the shore. And also understanding proper docks for Lake Huron's shores. So in times of high lake level like we have now, people with floating docks don't see as much of an issue because their dock goes up and down as the lake goes up and down. Whereas if you have a concrete or rock pile dock like I have, you know, it's 6 inches underwater right now in Tobermory. So using docks that can ebb and flow but that are secured properly to the shoreline can help reduce megaplastics. So with the cleaning up of nano to mega plastics, with the Lake Huron Centre for Coastal Conservation, we've been doing beach cleanup since 2015. And every year we seem to get more and more volunteers and clean up more and more garbage. And it's amazing to see these communities come together. towards a common cause of making their community more beautiful. And we've seen over the years that we have done less cleanups per year, but they're bigger and we're collecting more and more garbage. So to echo Brooke's point, I think last year we had almost 400 people attend our beach cleanups, and the year before that we had over 700. So it's quite astounding to see how much garbage that can be picked up in just 2 hours. We submit all of our data to the Great Canadian Shoreline Cleanup. They take data from all across the country, from coast to coast to coast. And the things that they find the most in these cleanups are cigarette butts, tiny plastic or foam, and food wrappers. And we have seen that echoed in our beach cleanups as well. So this item, or this little infographic here, at last year's Great Goddard Shoreline Cleanup, 4,723 cigarette butts were cleaned up in under 2 hours, and 52 fishing nets, 145 coffee cups, and 256 bottle caps. It's pretty amazing. And I don't know if you can see this picture in the bottom right hand of the screen, but it's a Pepsi can, and it has an advertisement on it for episode 2, The Phantom Menace, I think. And that was a Star Wars film that came out in 1999. And that was excavated from a dune last year in 2019 as the high lake levels took away the dune. This can emerged, and it was amazing because it was actually, you know, it had a date on it that we could refer to. So litter along our shorelines can live within the shoreline for eternity if they're buried long enough. Recycling all the waste that we find on the shoreline seems like a pretty obvious thing to do. You know, we can identify a water bottle that blows up on the beach. Oh, it's a number 2. It can be recycled, right? Well, actually, that's not always the case. So beach garbage is usually non-recyclable or needs to be cleaned heavily before recycling. And most of the time, the plastic that washes up on the shoreline and collected off beaches has been broken down by the sun's photovoltaic properties. So radiation from the sun breaks down that plastic. You think about your patio furniture on your deck, it fades over time. The same thing happens with this plastic. And when it reduces the quality of plastic, it reduces the sellability of that plastic. And then all rigid plastics, those hard like yogurt kind of containers, must be identified and sorted based on their number before they can be itemized and melted down and pelletized. So on the right-hand side of the screen, we see different colorful plastic pellets that have been made using post-consumer recycled plastics. So there's one company that's really cool, and they're local. They are from Stratford, Ontario, and they're called Sierra Plastic Products. We were able to tour their facility in Stratford and see what they do with all of the post-recycled material that they collect. So they purchase milk jugs, water bottle lids, and other specific number of plastic. They can melt them down, pelletize it, add dyes, and then create these amazing chairs. So you've probably seen these chairs. If you have driven up Highway 21, the Home Hardware in Kincardine, they have like a beautiful array of these colorful chairs out. Those are those Sierra Plastic Product chairs. And they use 60 pounds of recycled plastic in each Adirondack chair. So that's 760 milk jugs or 37,000 bottle caps. It's absolutely amazing. And it's a great way to see an item go from a single-use item into a post-consumer recycled product that can last. They have a warranty, I think, of 20 years. So it's amazing. There's another company out there called TerraCycle, and they're based out of the GTA. And they will take your post-consumer recycled items and be able to recycle them in some way. So they do have a beach plastic cleanup program, and they can take numbers 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6, so all those rigid plastics, and they can melt them down and sell them to buyers that are able to use those numbers, including Sierra Plastics. They also have a cigarette waste recycling program. So as you remember from one of my previous slides, cigarettes are one of the most prevalent items we find in beach cleanups. So we save all those cigarette butts, and we ran a program called Butt Free Beach that did this too. We collect the cigarette butts, we ship them to TerraCycle. They take all those filters that are in the cigarettes that are made of plastic microfibers, and they melt those down and they make them into shipping pallets. Like, it's something that you would never think could be recycled, but is being recycled really well as a part of their program. So a real world example of using TerraCycle is my family actually did an experiment this year. So they did a garbage audit in their house, and they realized that there was a lot of plastic that was plastic packaging waste that couldn't be recycled. It was non-rigid. So if you think about like a bag that carrots come in, and it can't be recycled, it can't be composted, it can't be reused. So what do you do with it? Well, my mom signed up for the TerraCycle program where you buy a box, and they have different sizes. The one she got was, I think, the medium size box. They saved all of their plastic packaging waste for 4 months and compressed it all into this little tiny box. It ended up being 13 pounds worth of garbage. And she was able to then divert all of that waste that would have gone to landfill into a recycling program. It cost $134 for the box, free shipping the box back to the company. But she was able to then say that she diverted that waste for, over a third of the year, basically, from landfill. So if you're looking at reducing what you send to landfill, this is a great opportunity. And TerraCycle actually has a lot of free programs too, where you just sign up for the program, they send you a shipping label, and then you can ship off all kinds of different items, from baby food packages to shampoo bottles to cling film, Sharpies, you name it. They have a ton of free programs. So check out their website, terracycle.ca, I think it is. So we know that there is a prevalence of plastic in our environment. So what do we do now? What's the next steps? I can think of 3. Source mitigation. So this is controlling where the plastic's coming from, removing it from the environment, and then preventing it from escaping into the environment in the first place. So here's an example of source mitigation. And like Brooke said, voting with your dollar. And there's a quote that I love. It says, if a bathtub was overflowing, you wouldn't reach for a mop, you would turn off the faucet. And that's what we need to do with single-use plastics. So in this example down here, we have a single-use liquid soap dispenser. And after it's gone, you would typically toss it into the recycling. You can do the next step where you use a recyclable or a reused container like this mason jar and take it to a refill station or store. Get it refilled every time, and then you're reducing that packaging. Or you can take it one step further and avoid packaging altogether and just using a fun, colorful, nice smelling bar of soap, and a lot of local artisans carry those. Another simple swap you can do at home is replacing cling film, like the plastic film, with bowl covers. So these are just like cotton fabric with an elastic around, and you can just slide it over your bowl and away you go. They can be washed. And I have a number of these in my own home that I use all the time. Another form of source mitigation is encouraging societal change. So we have our Coast Watcher Citizen Science program where we have, I think this year, 80 people across Lake Huron's shoreline monitoring their shoreline for all these different atmospheric and water conditions, but they also monitor plastic pollution on the shoreline. And we see in almost every report that there's a balloon. And when you go to events, like even graduation ceremonies right now, I know a lot of kids are graduating, you see these massive balloon arches or just lots of helium balloons that are around, and they drive me nuts because you just know that at least one is going to escape. And then we see them floating on Lake Huron. But we can take a celebration like this where we associate balloons and turn it into something like this, which is paper. It's biodegradable after. You can make it at home. You can buy them on Etsy. You can go to Michael's, and I think they sell them in a whole bunch of different places. But at least they can be either recycled or composted when they're done, and you can still be festive. Preventing plastic from entering the environment. That's number 2. Reduce, reuse, recycle. They say reduce first for a reason. We want to reduce our consumption, reuse the items we can, and then recycle it. And making this a societal norm instead of just recycle it. And there is responsibility on the part of the producer, the store, or restaurant that's giving out these items, but there's also responsibility on the consumer to be aware enough to refuse a straw or to pack your own. Promoting that pack in, pack out education, like when you go to the grotto for your Saturday, you need to bring home all the water bottles that you brought with you instead of trying to stash them in a little crevice, which we often see, unfortunately. And then, of course, better waste management at public areas. So this is just tweaking the different types of waste receptacles that are available to people. So this concept of leave only footprints, take only pictures, is this message being lost? We see right now an immense amount of backlash from people, coastal communities that are experiencing this influx of new visitors that are coming now that shorelines are opening, but they're leaving massive amounts of garbage like this. This was seen in Goderich last weekend. And there's reviews on TripAdvisor from 2015 that talk about there being a lot of garbage left on the shorelines. So really enforcing this message of take only pictures, leave only footprints. There's no maid service out in nature. And then the third thing is removing these threats from the environment. So we can try and prevent them. We can try and mitigate their creation or use in the first place, but eventually we have to remove them from the environment. This is unfortunately the most expensive method of controlling the issue. And in one study that I read, it said plans to combat and curtail plastic debris pollution in the Great Lakes will come at a significant economic cost of up to $400 million annually. That is a lot more than I think our tax dollars can handle for municipalities and other charitable groups. So the first two are definitely preferable options. When we're removing threats from the environment, they can be shoreline or river valley cleanups. We do a lot of cleanups, and Georgian Bay Forever, as you saw, do a ton of cleanups every year. But there's also local groups that are doing amazing work, like Keep the Bruce Clean and Green, Bruce Peninsula Environment Group. They, I think, have hosted cleanups in the past. And I think the Lions Head Harbor Club has also done work in keeping plastic out of the harbor there. So you can find a shoreline cleanup near you by going to the Great Canadian Shoreline Cleanup website at shorelinecleanup.ca. And the Coastal Centre also posts all of our shoreline cleanups on our social media, and we post them all through the Shoreline Cleanup website as well. Another item that we talk about in our July newsletter that's being released next week is preventing plastic from entering the environment with that visitor responsibility, the pack in, pack out, expecting no garbage receptacles, and if there is one, bonus, but there is also a land manager responsibility to warn visitors that there aren't as many receptacles, educate them about pack in, pack out principles, and then simply change the type of garbage can that is being used. So going from a garbage can like this with no lid, where there's a lot of waste escape, seagulls can come pick out the garbage at their free will, and changing to either a garbage can that has a lid. Ontario Parks has implemented the Moloch systems, which are garbage cans, but they have an underground reservoir with a bag, so they can hold up to 60% more garbage than a typical garbage can, and they are sealed away from wildlife can't get into them, but they require a special machine to pull out the bag. So a little bit higher of an investment up front, but very successful implementation once they go in. And I know that the City of Vancouver has actually implemented them in a lot of their city parks. So actions that you can take now after watching this webinar is you can either hold your own community cleanup or attend one near you. You can make those simple swaps that we talked about, and hold your family accountable. You know, family guilting is a thing, and it is encouraged when it comes to plastic pollution. So you can follow inspirational people on Instagram or Facebook groups. There's a ton of low waste or non-consumer groups on Facebook that are just flush with amazing ideas. You can buy post-consumer recycled products like those CRP chairs that I talked about, and supporting refill shops that open up and local artisans, for like the soap example. You can install the Filtrol units or buy a Cora ball or utilize the TerraCycle free programs. These are all really great and easy things that you can do. And they're fun to do too if you want to just try something out as an experiment, right? And take your own data. be that citizen scientist. If a Katie parent can do it and she's in grade 5, I think we all can, can't we? And then lastly, working with your community and municipality to prevent waste escape. So those community garbage pails that we see overflowing, maybe there's someone we can call when we notice that they're overflowing. Or we can form clubs to encourage those leave no trace principles. We can request different interpretive panels in areas that talk about plastic pollution in this area and why it's a problem and why people should mitigate the amount of waste that they leave behind. Educating visitors is really important, and it should be done even before that visitor makes it to the site, so they can plan ahead and plan to pack all their things in reusable Tupperware containers or reusable bags. So that is it for my section of the talk. If you want to learn more about the Coastal Centre, you can for sure. Our website's very easy to remember. It's lakehuron.ca. And if you have any other questions about my talk or want to learn more, our website is coastalcentre@lakehuron.ca. Otherwise, I will open it up for questions. Thank you so much, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Hannah. We do have one question actually about the slides. Someone's wondering if you would be able to share the slides in some way, maybe via email or something like that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think I can post them on our website, or they can send me an email to coastalcentre@lakehuron.ca and I can email them to the person.
Perfect. I had a question from myself for you. Those little nurdle pellets that you find on the beach, sometimes it's almost like you see a massive influx of them washing up all at once. Would there be any kind of reason for that?
We have actually been trying to study this and figure this out for almost a decade, believe it or not, working with Environment Climate Change Canada to try and track sources. There are so many different sources that they could be coming from because there are so many plastic facilities that use these nurdles along our Great Lakes shoreline. So we can maybe consider shipping or like waste escape as one. Like if something falls off a barge, then a bunch could wash up all at once. Or it could be they're emptying a truck in a parking lot, or a box opens up in a parking lot. Those nurdles fall on the ground. Rain happens, the nurdles all flow into the storm drain and away out to Lake Huron they go. Because a lot of storm drains just drain right out into the lake. They don't go to a water treatment facility. So, and unfortunately, nurdles don't have a little emblem or logo or anything printed on them, surprisingly. Or is that for some reason that they don't stamp them so they can't be traced? But we've been seeing them, like I said, for decades on Lake Huron, and Environment Climate Change Canada and us, we have not been able to find a direct source yet, but they are one of the biggest threats to wildlife on Lake Huron because they are cylindrical and small, just like a small egg. So they make them, it makes it very hazardous for wildlife, and they're very, very hard to pick up individually.
Yeah, I bet. All right. I don't think there are any more questions unless
Madeline?
someone else. Yeah.
Madeline, I got a question. Couple of things. The cleanup, the active cleanup, so you go out and clean up the lakes. That's great. You get a lot of stuff. But what I've noticed happenstance, anything that's a way of a recycle basket. So you can recycle glass, cans, it's open to the public. In my experience, and this isn't really a question, it's kind of a statement, and I don't know how to deal with it. But like you even go into a fast food restaurant and they've got recyclable plastics here and waste here. It's all mixed. Like you look into them and the waste has got recyclable plastics and the recyclable plastics have waste. So it's a very, very difficult thing societally trying to get people to actually separate. And separation is really, really important to have an important outcome. And again, I'm not putting this on you, but it's something between all the cleanups we need to think about and see if there's some way we can, I don't know if we can make it easy, but at least provide a better opportunity for source separation, if you like. And I have no answers, but just something that strikes me.
Yeah, Daryl, actually, that's a great point. Even when we talk about contamination in recyclable products, so when items are brought in to be recycled, they can withstand a certain amount of contamination within, say, a bale of plastics to be recycled. Contamination meaning like food or liquid that's left in bottles. So it's really important that everything we recycle, we actually rinse off first. But in some cases, when we're out and about, we can't rinse off items. So that's increasing the amount of contamination that is going into those recyclable items. And that is part of the reason why certain recyclable products have to just be diverted to landfill, because the contamination is too high.
Yeah, no, thanks. I know it's a huge problem, but we've got to find some way to deal with that.
Norbert had a question. Is there ongoing plastics monitoring to establish trends in the quantity of plastics in the environment within the Great Lakes?
I think maybe Brooke would be a better person to ask about that, since she has such close ties with the Rockman Lab. If Brooke wants to weigh in.
Is there ongoing plastics monitoring? There's nothing necessarily like that's jumping out of my head. I think what we're doing is definitely headed towards the right direction by I know ourselves and like Huron Coastal Centre for Conservation. I think we both submit our data to the Great Canadian Shoreline Cleanup and a variety of other different sources that we kind of are all starting to put this information together. I think it's new, and I think there's so many ways to kind of improve and develop this. But yeah, I think we're right now, we're still in the very much starting phase. However, I'm happy to say that we definitely have started. And I think that is often the hardest part. Yeah, so kind of answers the question. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Well, I think that's it for questions right now. Thanks again, Hannah. I might get Sean to hop on here as well.
Yeah, hi, absolutely. Thank you, Maddie, for fielding those questions, and to our participants for the questions. Hannah, your passion really shows through, and I'm really happy that you're doing what you do. I love the idea of pressuring family. Also, that holds yourself accountable too. So that's a great idea. And you mentioned shoreline cleanup several times. So, you know, tonight we're coming together, we're using our minds, we're getting our hearts involved, getting the passion going. But there's a lot of alarming facts there and a lot of things that we can start to do. We can start tomorrow. So tomorrow is actually a time when Sources of Knowledge, the Green Team at Bruce Peninsula National Park, are encouraging people to do a community cleanup. Get out there, act with your hands, do what we can do in your own backyard, along the road. Most things, especially in the Northern Bruce, but wherever you are in the world, they'll end up in the water. So pick them up before they get there. And so we have a cleanup event. It starts tomorrow at 10 a.m. and we can post the Zoom link in the chat. But we do have special guests. We do have Maddie, who you see on the screen here from Parks Canada, coming back, and we have Kevin Harper from Bruce Peninsula National Park. And they'll be doing an introduction talking about some other new initiatives that are happening. As well, we're going to use our physically distanced people power to try to clean up the communities and the shorelines. Anyone can join from anywhere, and we can start to make a difference. So we're going to meet back up. So we're going to get out there, you know, bring your reusable containers for your shoreline lunch, and then we'll come back at 1:30 after we've all done a couple hours of the cleanup. And I really wanted to host a post cleanup Zoom chat so that we could discuss maybe some of the things you found, some of the things that might have surprised you. And for me personally, seeing some of the things that I use wash up on the shoreline makes me think twice about whether I'd ever use that product again. Last year, I ran a snake hike quite a few times where ribbon was constantly being found along the shoreline of Lake Huron, and I'm never using ribbon again now after finding so much of it in the water. So yeah, I absolutely encourage everybody to join our cleanup tomorrow at 10 a.m. We'll post the Zoom link. Get out there and clean and come back for a discussion, just so we can talk to one another to find solutions. I want to thank all of our participants for coming, our two special guest speakers, Sources of Knowledge for being the host, and the Bruce District Parks for use of their Zoom platform to do this. So thank you, everyone. I do challenge you to come out tomorrow and act on what you've learned tonight. And also, I challenge you to share it on your social media, please, and try to get somebody else, you know, a friend or a family member, to do the same thing in their community tomorrow. I'm just going to pass it over to Daryl here to say a few words from Sources of Knowledge. Go ahead, Daryl.
Yeah, I think I'm on. Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Sean, very much for doing this. Great host, did a wonderful job. Just one question. I noticed in my top left here on my screen, it's recording. So yes. These are being fully recorded, correct? So in answer to that one question about are the slides available, perhaps this can be posted on the SOC website and perhaps other places as well. I think that would be useful. So yeah, no, guys, that's great. Really, really wonderful information. Thanks very much to everybody, to Hannah, especially Madeline for your coordinating skills, and Brooke. Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you, everyone. And we will absolutely, I hope that Lake Huron Coastal Center and Georgian Bay Forever can likely use this to share with some of their members this conversation that we've had. And yeah, Sources of Knowledge as well, hopefully can share it. So we'll get this message out to everyone that we can, and start working together towards the solutions. Thank you so much, everybody. Be safe. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you tomorrow.